Hello and welcome to the Flourishing Introvert Talks with me, Jo Rawbone. This is the podcast that celebrates the natural gifts of introverts so that we can flourish in all situations. Episode 213. What should I do about Ronnie? It's just as well I'm a lifelong learner because a few weekends ago my dear bro Paul helped me to unpack a particularly knotty problem. We hadn't set out with that intention. I'd just dropped in for coffee and a catch-up. But we've had a co-coaching relationship for many years, Paul and I. What's been so interesting is that the balance of coach versus coachee role has ebbed and flowed between us over that time. And we've always been there for each other. As we dropped into conversation this time, Paul's coaching questions enabled me to have a humongous revelation, one that I'm hopeful will be transformational. I say hopeful because whilst I can and am committing here, only time will tell. You may recall that one of my big bugbears in the coaching world is people who badge themselves as a transformational coach. The only person who can call it that is the coachee. Have they experienced a desired or required transformation? If they have, then great. Anyway, I'll step off that particular soapbox and get back to my issue at hand. It's fair to say that the knottiness of this problem has been decades in the making, so it may or may not be rapidly unravelled. And I'm okay with that. I've worked with people in the past who have guaranteed to rid me of such things in one session, and yet here we still are. So forgive me if I can be a little sceptical. In this episode then, I'm diving deeper into the topic of subpersonalities and sharing more about my own discoveries, with very good reason. Before I race ahead though, let me provide a bit of background. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, who also brought the introversion-extroversion dichotomy to prominence, introduced the idea of the persona or the mask that we present to the outside world. He suggested that beneath the facade of this mask lie various aspects of our personality. Several notable figures built on Jung's ideas, including contemporary psychologists Hal and Sidra Stone, who developed their psychology of selves. This proposed that we possess multiple distinct selves, each with their own motivations. The British psychologist and psychotherapist John Rowan wrote the book Subpersonalities, The People Inside Us, which explores the different aspects or parts of an individual's personality. And it was this book that piqued my interest back in the mid-2000s as it really resonated with me. The theory of subpersonalities suggests that our psyche is fragmented into different parts, often referred to as inner selves or ego states. These subpersonalities emerge as a result of our experiences, beliefs and social conditioning, and they each play a unique role in how we perceive ourselves and how we interact with the world. In fact, transpersonal philosopher Ken Wilber and humanistic psychologist John Rowan consider we have on average 12 subpersonalities each. Our subpersonalities can range from the nurturing caregiver to the inner critic, from the adventurous risk-taker to the cautious saboteur. Each subpersonality holds its own perspective, values, and emotional responses. One thing to be mindful of is that their needs and values sometimes conflict with one another, making it even more difficult to know our own minds. That's because our subpersonalities influence our thoughts, feelings, and behaviours in pretty complex ways. Becoming aware of our subpersonalities is important because that's what enables us to take charge of them rather than being enslaved by them. That's why we spend time on the Frustrated to Flourishing program, bringing them to the conscious mind. They also have a vital source of energy that may prove very useful to we introverts. As far back as episode 17, I introduced you to my inner critic, Gladys, and she has made several appearances since then. In episode 29, I shared about Goldie, my inner advocate, who's more spark of light than a physical entity and is non-binary. Discovering Goldie was a welcome addition to my subpersonality family, as they act as a necessary foil to Gladys, my inner critic. I've also encountered my inner rebel, and I love it when she gets involved. During a massage recently, don't ask me why this came to mind at the time, I realised that I needed to invite her out to play more often. So, be prepared. The reality is, I'm really starting to benefit from understanding my inner network, and I invite you to realise this benefit by understanding your inner network too. Recently, though, it became apparent that I was holding myself back for no good reason. And while I sensed that Gladys, my inner critic, was involved, I somehow knew that this was not entirely of her doing. I was fairly convinced that she had a collaborator. As a result of Paul's coaching questions, I found myself peering into what I can only describe as a void, an immense, unfathomable space, and I knew that lurking beyond the void, not in the corners but somehow out of sight and reach, was Gladys's collaborator. So I dropped into my intuition, lengthened my focus, and was able to look through and out the other side of the void. That's when I chanced upon him. Ronnie, my inner saboteur. Sneaky little Ronnie, you're going to have to try harder than that. As with all of my subpersonalities, I start by meeting them in my mind's eye and my mind's ear to understand their role. It turns out that Ronnie actively puts barriers in my way to prevent my growth, my success, and to even harm my well-being. He's pretty creative with his barriers. Some are emotional, some physical, and others cognitive. He writes all of his plans with a stubby little pencil in teeny weeny writing in a grubby, dog-eared little notebook. Then he gleefully marks them off with a big tick when they do indeed knock me off course, stop me in my tracks, or induce massive self-doubt. As I suspected, he and Gladys are indeed in cahoots, forming a formidable partnership, where she is fundamentally protecting me from making a fool of myself, and he stops me from reaching my potential. From what I can gather, he's operating from an outdated script, one that began to be crafted in my teenage years and has been refined through my decades of pretending to be someone I wasn't in order to fit in and get on. So Ronnie's script includes a whole ream of one-liners along the lines of, "You'll only be successful when you ... or if you ... And it's he who triggers my comparisonitis. And I've got to tell you, he's pretty proud of that. But here's one of his lines that really caught me out. Don't overtly talk about your work or programs, and don't be so visible because you're not as ... as someone else, and they're really popular. So Ronnie is egging me on to eye up my competition and feel jealousy and find myself wanting because I don't have the same level of engagement as someone else does. Ronnie's hypnotic mutterings in my ear arouse self-destructive thoughts and behaviours and beliefs that undermine my efforts and therefore my potential. Ronnie's plaintive mutterings has the same effect as the siren of the Lorelei. I'm sure some of you may have heard the story of the mythical woman said to lure sailors to the rocks in the mighty river Rhine with her beautiful song. Ronnie's song is not beautiful in any way, and rather than luring me to the rocks so my craft is smashed to smithereens, he lures me to the doldrums, that place of inertia and stuckness that I talked about a couple of episodes ago. So, what do I do about Ronnie? There are some who'll say, chuck him out, kill him, ignore him, evict him, and variations on that theme. But Ronnie is just one of my many subpersonalities, so he doesn't need banishing, he needs integrating. That only happens when I understand him fully, get clarity on why he's taken on this role, so I can discern when to pay heed and when to reassure him that all is well. And the wonderful thing is that when I'm able to genuinely reassure him, his carefully conceived and intentionally placed barriers disappear as if by magic. So in a way, integrating our subpersonalities is a form of magic. In conclusion, each one of our subpersonalities serves a purpose and has valuable insights to offer. We just need to pay attention. Understanding and integrating Ronnie, my inner saboteur, enables me to address some of the internal barriers that have been hindering my personal growth, my potential, and the impact I know is possible. By cultivating self-awareness and developing strategies to overcome self-sabotage, we can all empower ourselves to live more authentically and effectively navigate life's challenges. So if you ever hear me say, I'm in two minds, just remember it's probably way more than two. So do me a favour and ask me which ones are present, because that will help me bring them to my conscious mind. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, then please subscribe, rate us and leave a comment, because we know that helps other people find the podcast. And if other people find us, other introverts can flourish.